Great. I am going to kick off with some framing of the urban poverty geospatial data needs, and I am joined by a number of colleagues, so we'll have them turn on their cameras as their slides come up. And these are the series of speakers today: Dennis Mwaniki from UN Habitat, Caroline Cabaria from African and Population Health Research Center, Peter Elias from University of Lagos, myself, and hopefully we can be joined by Nusera Wanjiru Kamani from Community Mappers in Nairobi. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Dennis. Where are we with urban poverty mapping, Dennis?
Thank you very much, Dana, and good morning, everyone. For those who are joining in person, a pleasure for me to be here. So just to give a bit of background to this and where we are, from the habitat side, we ideally associate with the urban poverty directly with the presence of slums, but also people living in slum setting, former settlements. And this is something that we've been tracking the trends of slum population since 2000 as part of the MDGs Target 7D. Currently, we still tracking this, but an extended mandate to also include other elements of urban poverty that reflects not just slums and informal settlements, but also includes issues to do with housing inadequacy that is much more now common in more developed regions, including homelessness. So the need for the mapping elements is necessitated by many things. So traditionally, we've looked at data. The data we know, most of us know perhaps in the room, on slums and informal settlements is based on household level analysis of deprivations. So we have a series of deprivations, whether a household has access to water, sanitation, the sufficiency of living area. A lot of the challenges we've faced over the years, say the last 20 years actually, is one of the key ones is that due to the type of data needed, the data collection processes, particularly on the surveys, do not define areas that are identified as slums or informal settlements as part of their sampling frame. So it makes it quite difficult to analyzing, and we still have had to rely then on combined data on household level deprivations, which sometimes could mean household based in a very rich neighborhood is classified as a slum household, while sometimes also a household that is within a purely deprived neighborhood could also be classified as a non-slum household. Of course, we've had other problems such as lack of data on tenant security. I know this is even information that is not often collected even in developed regions, as well as despite the many types of data coming from communities and other subnational levels, a lot of this information is also not included in the statistics that are produced on slums and informal settlements. And here just to say the data that you see that shows that the proportion of population living in slums and informal settlements has been on a decline since the 2000, but the number of population, the actual number of people living in slums and informal settlements and been on rise is purely based on this. So next slide, please. So it then begs the question of what is the value added by now thinking a bit about mapping. I highlight here two key issues, and of course there are many other reasons, but from a global perspective and where we sit and the work we're doing at UN Habitat, we've been working a lot with countries and cities. And one of the key questions that we always faced with is when you ask and work with the National Statistical Office to estimate the population of people living in slums and informal settlements, say we produce a number like 60 dealing with this. So where are these 60% living? And as I mentioned, there's a mix of places that these households which contribute to this number would be. Some of them would be like in neighborhoods that purely cannot be classified as slums and informal settlements. And this itself is a huge need and demand for us to shift to a more approach that looks at mapping to be able to delineate these places that have informality characteristics, or which can be classified as slums. And connected to this, of course, because the work we do is directly supposed to support national and city level policy making and decision making processes. We've increasingly now received officially requests from member states through resolutions that they passed 3 years ago that has asked us as an agency to work more closely to define methods that will help us to understand the slums and be able to enumerate these areas as partial units that will not only help to produce data, but also to help them even to focus their decision much more concisely. As an associated development is ideally also in the next round of censuses in 2030, we've actually put in the revision of the principles and recommendations of population and housing census information there, or at least a request for disaggregation specifically to be done on slum areas and informal settlements. Here using a mix of methods that range from nationally defined methods to that we've been working on, and to enable countries to be able to produce the trends that are happening. So we expect to see an improvement in this kind of data in the coming years. In the next slide, I highlight here exactly what we are interested in. What part of it, of course, we've been tracking over the years. But the key things that we see ranging from the global level where UN Habitat we sit and supporting, of course, local actions with information on one, where the slums and informal settlements are located and what the sizes are. And this could be either a big settlement within one single city or multiple settlements the same city. Would like to see how much of these settlements they occupy in terms of land. We've had this continuous narrative that slums occupy like a very small proportion of the city, yet they account for, in many cities, more than half of the urban population. So we want to actually to have an actual statistic on this type of information. And we also want to look at the levels of severity. So when you talk about slums, informal settlements, of course, they are diverse. In the context of one, how extreme they could be in terms of the densities of developments or the locations where these settlements are located, or things to do with availability or access to basic and core services that enhance the dignity of human living. And we interested, of course, to see this. You can have, for example, even within one settlement or informal settlement, one part is much more deprived than another, and knowing this information would directly contribute to knowing where to intervene, even for the mayor or the leaders at the local level. The fourth thing we're interested in many cases, fast expansion of slums or growth, but we also see a lot of demolitions of informal settlements. And by integrating geospatial data here, we are interested to see in a much more almost near real-time basis the kinds of trends that are happening. Could be every year or every few months, depending on things like when it's disaster strike. Would be able to analyze these changes and also what they mean for the urban poverty status as well as the urban living. And finally, and perhaps directly also more relevant at the global level, is the understanding the share of population that lives in slum informal settlements that we want to use to complement the data that we've already been producing based on the household level deprivations. Now, this vision is what we're working on. Already we've made very good progress working with different teams. And one of the key things is the acknowledgement and appreciation that while we want to produce this standardized map of informality across countries and within cities and between cities, the manifestation of informality is very diverse. And we also have to acknowledge this in any models or any procedures and processes that we build. And that will help us to also create data that is aggregatable to a national, regional, and global level. So in the next slide, I just share the what we call the multi-level approach that we proposed to account for these significant variations in one, the need for the different types of data, but also the acknowledgement of the variations on how the informalities manifest. We have this 3 layers that, but inside they contain quite a bit of requirements from a mapping perspective. And we here just organize it from the bottom up, but you can also read it from up and down. Sorry, we've organized here from top to bottom, but you can also read it the other way. And the idea is we have now, luckily, very significant advancements from a geospatial data perspective, very remote sensing, other observations that can enable us to be able to define a set of parameters that we call spatial parameters or morphological parameters that can help us identify deprivation or informality. And this mostly could be things associated with, say, the densities of settlements, the locations of settlements in sensitive areas, so risky places or in places that are hazardous, or going all the way to getting data from communities that can help to delineate these settlements. So in the first layer, the baseline layer, the idea is to have these sort of parameters that can be applied uniformly across cities and in any country. So if we have settlements, say, that are super dense in Africa, for example, and you have the same exactly type of settlement that's super dense in the US, and they're lacking the same kind of services, we should be able to identify this without saying that these are places only in developing regions. And this will help us actually to be able to understand the full picture at the global scale on what is happening. Then the first layer here, we can apply it ideally with little localized data because we just define the parameters and apply them uniformly. But as we go to the next step, things start to become more interesting. We saying that, look, we understand these variations. Now we want to understand in places like Latin America, you find issues more, not in some cities, not more on density, but more on the type of structure that is disorganized or the type of places that are built without permission or land tenure. So we want to start integrating these unique elements that define the city or the region or cities within a region and apply these then parameters to train the models that we're working with and be able to produce much more localized data at the local level to produce both the mapped information, the morphological parameters, but also start integrating socioeconomic data here, which is not necessarily required in the first layer, to be able to also look at things like severity at different settlements. Then at the much finer level, which is of course the most relevant at the local city level, we want them here to have the very, very fine data, both in terms of other observation resources to produce this information, as well as the kind of training data that is needed. So data produced by communities, data validated by local city leaders or local communities at each of the cities, and analyze and identify places that they relate with these informal settlements. And we see this as connected processes. Of course, as we produce data at the local level, we believe this also builds into the much higher levels of the production of the global, regional and global maps and analysis trend. And this will continuously help us to refine the model. We already have very interesting initiatives. I know some of them you'll hear about today at the different scales, but the idea for us is we've been building a community of all the people involved in this kind of work to ensure that we are all working collectively and collaboratively towards the shared vision. And we already have some very interesting things happening with this group, which I hope that you'll be able to appreciate and acknowledge today. Thank you. I stop here.